What have you got under management?
About 80 million.
About 80 million.
Yeah.
And you generated that in the last 6 years.
Yes.
That's huge. Well done.
Thanks.
What percentage of that business is US?
About 80%.
80%.
Yeah.
Okay. How often do you go to the USA?
Well, you're going to catch me out because the answer is not a lot.
Yeah.
The answer is not a lot. I do want to go more. So I suppose giving you some substance to this actually ties in with Hoxton's journey as well. If we look back to the period in which I've been building that book, we set our business up not long before COVID hit. I think Hoxton generally benefited quite well. I don't want to say, COVID was a good thing, but we benefited quite well from being a young company during that period, not having too many fixed processes that we were so wedded to that we couldn't adjust. And what we were able to do is transition very quickly to online. So meetings moved from face-to-face to video very, very quickly. That for us allowed us to service clients instead of being focused like perhaps competitors that already existed in the industry on face-to-face meetings where if I want to deal with a client on one side of the US and then California to New York, for example, on the same day, that's impossible if you're flying to meet these people. On a video call, you can finish and 2 seconds later jump onto a call with someone in New York, which allowed us to transition, or allowed me certainly to transition to servicing individuals all over the US without being there. And then if you tie in the fact that often the topic of conversation was starting out as UK assets they've left behind, and my qualifications here in the UK, and the fact that I sit on the license here, ultimately that gave me some credence to look at that and then start those conversations building from there. So actually, you can service clients in the US without necessarily being there too much. COVID and video calls to perhaps thank for that. Although I would argue, yes, you've got to get out there more and get a little bit more face-to-face eventually with your client bank. But it's not necessary to actually start building a book to be physically residing in the US and be there on a regular basis. And in theory, you can do it without really going there at all.
There we go. And I think that's what people find it hard to get their head around. And that's what I found it hard to get my head around when I was talking to Hoxton, because I'll be honest with you, it sounded too good to be true. I was just thinking to myself, what are you doing? This sounds really dodgy. And it wasn't until I started looking under the bonnet and sitting down with like Paul Tate, for example, our global head of compliance, and talking to Chris in more detail. It was like, you're doing this, multi-jurisdiction advice. You've got, you're regulated in multiple jurisdictions, 6, 7, I think now with India, right? That we can actually give advice in those areas, but you can be sat in the UK doing that. And as long as you're qualified to do so, then you can build a book that's international. So if your clients that are UK based are moving here, there and everywhere, and a lot of them do in oil and gas, for example, right?
Well, look, I think that's a really important point, is that the world is more global. The world, as far as I'm concerned, it shrinks year on year in terms of the availability of things, the connectivity of things. More and more individuals have assets in more than one country, and that's just ramping up year on year on year. There are regular talks about the exodus from the UK in terms of people wanting to go and live elsewhere. It's pouring with rain outside here. You're not massively surprised. I believe you've just moved to Dubai.
I have.
I'm sure the weather is much nicer.
Much nicer.
The reality is more and more people are leaving, but that's not just from the UK. The world is more mobile. So this need for multiple jurisdiction advice is only becoming greater. The need for people that understand the taxes, the implications of holding those assets, because assets aren't always as movable as you as an individual. So you may have pensions you built up in the UK before you moved to Dubai. You can't just pick those up and take them. You can't cash out of them because you're not 55 at this stage. Ultimately, you're in a position where that asset's going to stay behind. You're going to move to Dubai. You may then move onwards. Even if you stay within Hoxton, you could move to the US, to Australia. Ultimately, you're going to pick up assets in different areas. This is not an uncommon problem to have, but having someone that understands all those pieces of the puzzle and can bring your financial picture together holistically is really important.